I'm sitting here today with Jim and Virginia Page, and they have a God story to tell. In fact, Virginia has a living example of the work of God in her life, and I've invited her to come in and talk to us today and share that story with us. Virginia, would you just, from your heart, tell us the story of what God has done in your life?
At work, we donate blood every so often. They have a blood drive, and I always give blood. Well, that day they wouldn't take my blood because my hematocrit was too low, and the Red Cross worker said, I strongly advise you to see your doctor and get it checked. And they did blood work, and they called me at work and said I needed to see a hematologist because my counts were all messed up. Mm-hmm. Then they had me come back in a week later, and they did a bone marrow biopsy, which was very painful. So I went back in, and he told me I had myelodysplastic syndrome. Well, I never heard of that, and he said it was a rare disease that it affects the blood cells. And but with mine, it was only the red blood cells that weren't maturing, and that with some people that affects the platelets and the white cells and all of that. So then they put me on a chemo drug, and so then I just went with transfusions for a while. And then the doctor wanted me to try another chemo. That knocked out all my counts, and that's when I got sick, really sick. Yeah. And I was at work, and I was having real bad chest pains. I thought I was having a heart attack. And the doctor called Jim to come get me, to take me to the hospital. Wow. But I don't remember getting to the hospital. And from there, it's his.
Well, it was a tough ride to the hospital because I had to keep telling her, hang on. Got her in the emergency room. They come out and said she's got pneumonia. But in the meantime, this girl couldn't sit still.
February 2nd, 2011.
And the little nurse come in, looked at her and says, oh no, you're not staying here. Says, you're going down to ICU now. I saw her the next day. The next night, they called me in the middle of the night and told me, says, we got to put her on a respirator. Wow. And I had to get up, go in and sign the permit. Well, her right lung wasn't as bad as her left lung. Her left lung was about the color of this wall here. It was just white. They started her on antibiotics and all of that. Come back and says, well, she has got a fungus in her blood. But in the meantime, she was knocked out. No knowledge at all of this. And
my lung collapsed.
They come in and they says, well, we have got to take some of the fluid off the lung. They moved the tube down, lower part of the lung, and that began to take some of the fluid off. They put the trach in, and I told him, I says, we really need to think about putting a feeding tube or something into her. And he says, okay. They run another test and says, okay, she's got fungus in the heart. An operation's got to be done. We'll get her transferred. Determined that there was no fungus in it, she didn't need the operation. About the first week, they were pumping her through antibodies. Well, in the meantime, she caught the famous hospital disease, staph disease. There was about 4 days in there. She acknowledged nobody, nothing. Looked at the ceiling.
So they did an MRI on my brain.
And I know you still struggle, but
yeah, but I'm
look at you today.
Right. I'm fortunate to be here. I'm blessed.
I was standing there waiting on the results that morning. And I says, well, I looked up to God, done a little prayer. Says, I think I've done everything I can do. I'm not in charge. And it seemed like from that day on, up the hill we came. After about a week, they're going to have to send her to rehab and get her off the respirator.
Well, during this time, my heart started racing. Couldn't get it slowed down, so they were going to
Wow.
do a procedure on me. But since I had all these infections,
Yeah, they come in to shock our heart into rhythm
Into rhythm.
with it. But it seemed like God just stepped in about an hour before, sitting there watching the machine, and it went.
so it was a reason that I waited till the end of the
Yes.
day.
But they kept her on sedated, and we moved over to Select Hospital from there. That was a long, hard road to get her off the respirator.
Well, the doctor over at Select told him I'd never walk out of there.
I saw you walk into here.
Goes to show how God works. He doesn't
Absolutely.
know.
Absolutely.
I guess I shouldn't hold hard feelings. And I finally come to the conclusion. We listened to a minister who said something that rung a bell with me. It says, "You may not recognize the angel that God sends." They would try to come in, take her off the respirator. I guess it was about 2 weeks into it, and she started building a little bit. She turned the machine off. Well, she stayed off of it for about 3 hours. And that was a positive.
So, and then after that, I started remember bits and pieces for about 2 weeks. But I was just wondering why I was in the hospital and why couldn't I talk.
Oh.
They told me I'd never walk out of there. Well, I didn't. They wheeled me
They
out.
wheeled
but
you
I
out,
still
sure.
come out. So, and then for when I was in the hospital because if they'd performed that surgery, I wouldn't have survived it.
Yeah.
And the Lord knew that.
We still had the feeding tube. It says we're going to move it a millimeter at a time. We went back in 2 weeks and they x-rayed. The doctor come in and he says, "We're going to take it out." She says, "Oh, it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt." I can remember. So she asked the nurse, "Is this going to hurt?" She says, "No, it's not going to hurt you." And when Dr. G come in,
I asked him, is it
That'd be my question.
yes, this tube here in your stomach, they're just going to pull it out.
he told her, what was it? Take a deep breath.
I didn't even feel it come out.
Our liver has no damage to it, so that was the good Lord took care of us.
Yes.
We have been awful blessed.
But when I walked into Dr. Patel's office for the first time after getting out of the hospital, he looks at me and he says, "You are a miracle."
Absolutely.
He says, "It wasn't what we did that saved you." He says, "It was the one up above." He says, "You are truly a miracle."
Absolutely.
And for a doctor to say that, you know,
Yes.
and as it was the one up above, he says, "You are truly a miracle."
Absolutely.
And for a doctor to say that, you know,
Yes.
and so
Yeah, I think he knew.
yeah, he
I think he
did.
knew. He knew this was beyond him and medical.
And then when the Lord's worked, I got sick back in January, you know, with this cold. I thought it was a cold, and I went to the lung doctor, and he x-rayed me and said it was an infection in my lung. He put me in the hospital on IV antibiotics, and I was in there for, 3 days, something like that. And they released me and kept me on oral antibiotics, and nothing was helping. I went a couple of weeks, it still wasn't doing any good, and so I went back and he put me on home health care IV. And well, first he did a bronchioscope, wasn't
Right.
it? And found some kind of bacteria. So they put me home health care for 2 weeks with 2 antibiotics, IV antibiotics a day. And that still, after 2 weeks afterwards, I still wasn't any better. I was getting worse. In fact, I couldn't breathe hardly. I couldn't walk across the room. And I just kept getting worse. And so then he did a CT scan, I
Right.
think it was, and it was still, he couldn't see anything, I guess, and so it was still more antibiotics, and I was just continuous antibiotics, and I wasn't getting any better. And so the 1st of June, one night, that evening, I went to bed, and well, I coughed 24/7 anyway with it. I couldn't sleep hardly. And when I went to bed, I started a real bad coughing spell, and I just started coughing up lots of blood. So that I went to the emergency room.
Right.
Well, I think God caused that to happen, because when I got to the emergency room and got examined and everything, they decided to send me to Vanderbilt. Well, they transferred me to Vanderbilt, and they ran all kinds of tests, and they sent me home then. And they called me about 5 days later, and they found out what it was. It was a aspergillus bacteria or fungus in my lung. I have in my left lung, a mass had formed when it collapsed before, and a cavity had formed in that, and this fungus had collected in that cavity.
Wow.
And so then they put me on this fungus medicine, which I have to be on for about a year, but it's got me where I can sleep and no coughing and any of that.
Yeah.
So the Lord has been good to me. And
Certainly.
He just keeps blessing me.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I can see it in your smiles.
So,
Wow.
so, yep.
You know, since I've known you, you have been an inspiration of faith to me. Through your struggles, this fella has remained positive, hopeful, faithful, and
That he has. He's my rock.
he is. He
He's
is.
my rock.
He is.
You can't tell it, but what I do here, though.
I can. I can because Jim, this is real. This is real. You know, God has blessed your life in such a way, and we're talking now life and death matters. You know, it's great when God blesses us with family, with experiences, with fun, vacation, friends. All of that's awesome. And God is a wonderful God to do that, but we're talking life and death matters here, and God has blessed.
So, yeah, his cousin works at Gateway Hospital in the lab, and when she'd get off at night, she said she'd come up in ICU and sit with me for a couple of hours. And she told me here about a year ago, she says, I want you to know that 99% of the people that were sick as you, they don't live.
Yeah.
So,
Yes. So we truly
And you walked out.
right.
Rode out in a wheelchair and then walked away.
That's right. I had to go through some therapy.
Yeah.
That was funny though. They told her, says, Alexis, we're gonna get you up and let you walk tomorrow. Well, old Jenny thought she'd just throw them legs over that bed and hop right up.
Wasn't quite that way, was it?
I couldn't raise myself up in bed. I had to have help, but I thought I could just walk away.
Yeah.
So, it was like wet noodles when you stand up.
It was just. It's been a miracle. It's been a.
Yep, and I'm truly blessed. I am. So.
And when you get down and you think you're having a bad day, you're not having it. You get up in the morning and you're going to say, this is going to be the best day of my life.